The power of equality.
Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I am your host as always, Professor Prime. So, in this video, I talk about the power of equality. And when I had this idea before, I had a whole lot of things that I was going to do, and they did not go as planned. So I wanted to take an alternate take and have a chill conversation about it. As chill as you can with math, which I feel can be pretty chill, but it's up for debate, so that's fair. So for me, it's like let's start with what equality is in terms of math, right? So pretty much, if you're dealing with equality, it's this ability to say that two statements represent the same quantity, and this is indicated by the equal sign, and that right there, right, it's like all of it sounds small, but it's big, and it can be used in a variety of ways. So a lot of times when you deal with algebra, you aren't always told the why. It's like, you're given a hammer or you're given a drill and you're told, hey, hammer this, hammer that, drill this, drill that. And you're like, but what are these exactly and why am I hammering? Why am I drilling? And you're not always told. But I'm going to talk about that for a little bit. So with math, for me, it's always this powerful tool to communicate. And the idea being, for me, that a lot of what we think of when we think of math is actually something that's natural that we're trying to interpret and we're trying to use to communicate about the universe. And to that end, algebra is the language that we use to say something about the universe. And in a vacuum, it can be very confusing. In a vacuum, you're not always told what you use it for, but the truth is, a lot of things can be represented by math in the physical world. And algebra is meant to take a lot of things that we do naturally, because you are all natural mathematicians, never forget. It's meant to take a lot of things that we do naturally and then generalize so that we can use that for other purposes, so that we can build on that, so we can say greater and greater things. And to that end, at some point, I want to like put up some slides that I had on translating words into math, because I think that'll be useful to like look at, and I feel like it kind of drives some things home. So that's another story for another day. But my big point is, equality is useful in so many different ways. And I'm going to mention a few, but let's be clear, it does not like limit things. So one of the things is like if I have a statement and I want to figure out a way to talk about it mathematically, I can translate the words that I have into math using algebra. And if I am dealing with something that is an equation, then I'm able to roll with that. And by that I mean like if we have some words and you're being told that one thing is, the same quantity as the other thing, or a better way to say it, but maybe not too much better, is this like thing one is the same thing as thing two. That is part. That's saying that hey, they're the same. That's where the equation part comes into it. That's where the equality part comes into it. And then you take that and you end up making an equation and you solve an equation. And it's like, well, what do you mean when you do solve an equation? And I'll probably talk about this in another video at some point or another. But when you solve an equation, what you're doing is you're taking two statements that are conjoined by that equal sign, and you're getting to say some cool stuff about it. So you have two statements where you have these quantities that are equal to one another, and what you are doing when you are solving that equation is you're finding a value, or you're finding values that make that statement true, that overall statement that hey, thing one is equal to thing two, and that's what you're doing when you're solving an equation. And for the basic stuff, you're isolating this or you're isolating that to get to that point, um, or whatever variable that you might be talking about. So that ends up showing up a lot in math. I cannot express that enough, right? And the cool part is, other ways that equality can be useful is like when you're just thinking about numbers, because at the end of the day, right, numbers are just symbols, but it's what they represent that's important. And there's different ways to represent, a bunch of numbers. And just to not belabor the point, but like for 42, for instance, there's so many different ways that you could go ahead and represent that, right? I could say that 42 is equal to 7 times 6. I could say that 42 is equal to 84 divided by 2. I could say that 42 is equal to 20 plus 22. I could say that 42 is equal to 44 minus 2. And they all represent the same quantity, right? Like, so whatever 42 is equal to. So I think that's worth noting, but it gets better. So whenever you think about substitution in math, basically it's taking advantage of a quantity, or like some expression that's taking the form of that quantity. There's a better way to say that. So when you're dealing with substitution, you're taking advantage of the fact that you have one quantity and you have another quantity that also represents the same thing, and you're able to plug that in and use that other quantity instead, and that might be useful in this situation or that situation, and it actually shows up a lot more in math than you'd ever think. It's very useful for solving systems of equations, but that's not the only use. So yeah, that could all be useful, or it could be helpful to think about parts of a whole in different ways, right? And that could be useful for when you're adding fractions. That could be useful for when you're talking about pie charts. Like, there's a lot of purposes to that. And one, I guess, big example is like what 1/2, right? There's a lot of different ways you can talk about 1/2. You can do the fraction form 1/2. You could also say it's 0.5 or 0.50 or 0.50, whatever you want to do. But you could also say that it is 50 over 100, aka 50%. Although I wouldn't just say 50 out of 100, because I would want to simplify. But that's just the thing there too, right? Like, there's just so many different ways to express it. I don't want this to go on too long, so I'm going to close it up pretty soon. My big thing is just that with equality, it is a beautiful property to have, because it allows you to say one thing is the same thing as the other thing. So you have these two statements, they represent the same quantity, and you can use that to your advantage in just ways that you might not automatically think about. So I think it's a powerful thing in math, and honestly, a powerful thing in real life when we're talking about equal rights. I hope to see a world where we actually get that someday. Until then, I'm glad to have it in math. So I'll see you all next one. Professor Prime out.